Monday of next week. So this is a character that I drew. This was part of a sculpting challenge, so it was like every day you get a new sculpting challenge, and this one took about 3 hours. So start to finish, 3 hours, modeling it, texturing it, and then creating these still images. And there's not a crazy amount of detail. Oops. In the character. Like if you look at the fingernails, there's no fingernails there, they're just like hands. Okay, and then I was able to kind of hide a lot of stuff with these leaves, which just look like a nice accessory. All right, so so in order to render this out, everything has to have a material to it. So last class I showed how to assign materials and shaders and give it some color, and that's what I've done. So each one of these pieces has different colors on there. Here's different iterations of that same character. And even like the eyes, I have these like crazy eyes, but I ended up with the other eyes that are there. Okay, so my first step in this is I have to create a document size. ZBrush does not have a default document, or it has a default document size, but it doesn't have like a menu bar or option box that pops up telling you what is your size. Like Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, they all say what size format you want to work at. This doesn't. So I'm going to go under a document. And then down here, this is where I can specify the size that I want to render this out at. So you have two choices. I want an 8x10 or a 10x8. Okay, so you can either go horizontal or you can go vertical with yours. Depending on how you want to lay it out, you can do whichever. Either one, it's 300 dots per inch. So if you take 8 inches times 300, you get 2400. You take 300 times 10 inches, you get 3000. So in this case, I went with a, I'm going to show you both. So this is an 800 or 8-inch wide by 3000 pixels high. So that's an 8x10 vertical. You have to make sure constraint proportions is off. If it's on, then obviously it's going to like lock your two numbers together. And now that doesn't create the document. It's not automatically that size. I have to go into my document and say resize. And once I do that, then it'll resize my document. Now, once I did that, you'll see that he becomes stretched out, okay? So I have to redraw my character on here. So I'm just going to click and drag a new guy. There he is, come on. And then I'm gonna hit T so that I could spin around him. Now to clear that other guy off the screen, I go to color and I say clear the color. And now the other guy is gone. All right, now where'd my bar go here? I may have hit the wrong button. There we go. Let's switch this back. Oops, that's interface colors and interface layouts. So over here, this is all interface layouts. That's a good one there. Yeah, that's not a good one. I want that one. I want that one. There we go. All right, so now that I have this, because I needed this bar up here, I need to switch this so that I can see the entire thing. My document is now 2400 pixels wide by 3000 pixels tall, but it still looks like it's like landscape. It still looks like it's horizontal. So I go over here to AA half, and what it does is it shows you the actual size. So this is the actual size inside here, and now as I bring my guy bigger, it's going to be that 8x10. So I'm going to try to find a neat direction, a neat angle to kind of show him off at. Okay, and now my goal is that I'm going to have something maybe off to the side here. Because I went with a landscape, I'm going to have something off to that side area there. Actually, this isn't a landscape, is it? This is the regular one. Yeah, this is the regular one, so I put him kind of in the center. I know it looks like it's still kind of stretched out, but I think it's just my screen is kind of stretched out. Not that. That doesn't want to update. All right, we'll just ignore it for now. All right, so now that I have him kind of centered, then I could render him out. Now if I wanted to go the other way, I would swap these around. So I would say this is 3000 wide by 2400 height and resize. Yes. And then again, I would draw out a new one. I would hit T, and then I would clear my thing. Now obviously that sucks. It's a horrible thing that we even have to do that, but it just is what it is. Alright, so now he kind of fits inside the screen, like that. Cool. Alright, so I'm going to put him off to the side because I want to do a little image off to the side. I've turned the floor on, so if you don't have the floor on here, then you won't get any shadows on the floor, so I want shadows on the floor, so I'm putting the floor on. And then everything that we're going to do is going to happen under this render menu. So if I go to this render menu and click the little gear on the top left, it puts it on this side, that way I can see everything. Under the render properties, this is where we can turn on certain things. So I've turned on shadows because I want shadows. I've turned on ambient occlusion because I want ambient occlusion. Subsurface scattering because I want that. I have some transparency on here, so I turn that on, and then wax preview. Okay, and what I should get is several different render passes. Each one of those things is a render pass that will let me add or edit stuff later on. So I've just turned these guys on here. Under my shadows, I can go in here and edit my shadows. So I changed my shadow angle to about 123. If this is 0, I'm going to get super crisp shadows. As I spread this out bigger, I'm going to get softer shadows. In order to compensate my shadows here, which we'll see in a second, I may need to play with these rays. So the bigger the angle is, usually the more rays you need to help smooth out any of the shadows. So I may have like big shadows, like that are nice and soft, but they're not smooth. So I add more rays to help smooth it out. Okay, I typically don't play with much of this other stuff. Here's my ambient occlusion. So I can play with my ambient occlusion strengths or rays or angles or any of this other stuff. Subsurface scattering stuff. Typically don't need to play with that. Here's my anti-aliasing. So if I need to pull this up, if I'm getting a lot of like edge pixels that are kind of like stair-stepped or looking weird, I can pull my anti-aliasing up some. And then here's depth. So again, I can play with my softness of my depth or the intensity of my depth or my depth values. And then so on. So I'm going to hit this BPR button, and this is going to render out my character. Okay? Now when it renders it, what it's doing is it's saving it onto these little buffer images that we'll be able to see. And then we can take those images and drop them into Photoshop. So up here at the top, this is where our progress is. It's going through and doing all of this stuff. When we're done rendering, when it's done rendering, we should see that this grid, you can't see the grid, but it's there. There's a grid right down there that disappears. And now we have shadows, and we have kind of like the finished example of what the rendering looks like. So what I'm going to do is I need to see those renderings and do something with them. Under the render pass right here, here's where all my passes are. So here's the shaded view, there's the depth, there's the shadow, there's the ambient occlusion, here's a mask, here's a subsurface scattering, and then there's the floor. Now if I needed the floor to be bigger, sometimes you'll have your character, they'll be on the floor and their shadow excuse me, gets cut off by the floor because it's this tiny little platform. You can go under your draw and take the floor and make the floor bigger. So grid size, you can crank that up to a bigger size. And then when you render it, the floor will obviously be bigger. So I'm going to save these. So I just click on each one of these items, and I'm going to save this. I'm going to drop this into a new folder, and I call it what it is. So this says shaded, so I call that shaded. This one says depth, so I call it depth. This one says shadow. This one says AO. This one's mask. That one's subsurface scattering. And then this one's the floor. Alright, so now I can go into Photoshop, and I'm going to open up my image.
Is it different if you want to do the 360 like James up?
Yes, I'll show that in a second too. The first part is all the same, but when you render your stuff out, it's different. Sarcona, ZBrush renders. Alright, so there's my guy right there, and you can tell that the image obviously isn't lining up right. Like, this is obviously a bigger area. For some reason in this scene, this AO half is not like actually working. I'm not sure why it's not working. It should be. But I could just zoom in, render it out again, and then it would obviously zoom him up more. Okay. So I'm going to take all of these and condense these into one. So I'm going to go to where my shaded is, which is right here. And I'm just going to copy and paste each one of these into it. So I copied the shadow, I close it. I'm going to copy the SSS and close that. I'm going to copy the mask, close that, copy the floor. Nothing really I need with the floor anyway, but just for fun. And then the depth. There we go. And the AO. Okay. So now inside of this image, I have all the stuff that I need. So here's all my layers. Okay, this is my AO. I'm going to go through and rename these. This is my depth. I can tell because it's black and white and there's a little bit of transparency or a little bit of fading as we get further out. This is the floor. This is my SSS. I can tell because it's kind of like a little halo going around it. And I must have copied that one twice, so I'll just delete that one. And then this is my shadow. And then there's my regular guy. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to pull him off of that background. Okay, so I'm going to my mask, which I probably didn't open. There it is. And I'm going to control click on my mask. I'm going to copy it. And then I'm going to double click my layer and make a layer mask. Then if I alt click it, I can just paste that layer mask right inside here. And what that does is it gives me the ability to click on him and have him totally isolated from the background. Okay? Now if you were doing this inside of like Nuke, which is typically where I do this at, it's much easier just to say I'm going to take the color information, the brightness from this one or the red channel, and that's my alpha. So in Photoshop we can't do that. But in Nuke, you definitely could. So there's the mask. So now I'm going to take my Ambient Occlusion, which is right here, and I'm going to set this to be a multiply. And what that's going to do is if I turn this off and on, let me get closer to my character. As I turn it off and on, you can see there's definitely some depth that happens on him, especially like in the neck area and around the eyes. We're getting a little bit more depth on the character because that Ambient Occlusion is there. Alright, so that's what that Ambient Occlusion is doing. Now for the shadow, I'll do something very similar. I'll just drop this here, set this to multiply, and now my character, you can see, has a shadow that's on the ground. And he has shadows that are on him. So it helps, again, kind of set that into where he's supposed to be. If it turns out that those shadows are a little bit too dark, I can go to the opacity and crank that down. Same thing with the Ambient Occlusion. I could crank that down too if I'm not liking how those are looking. Now I also have this Subsurface Scattering, and what this is good for is adding like some rim lighting to it. So if I just want to have like a little bit of glow or a little bit of rim light to the character, I can use this thing to do that. So I'm going to go to a new layer here, and let's say that I just, oops, not that. Let's say I fill this with a bright color, just green. And I'm going to add a layer mask to it. I'm going to go to my Subsurface Scattering. I'm going to copy it, alt click on the mask, paste it in, and then go back in here. Now you can see what's happening is that he still has that kind of greenish hue around him, but we're getting the green like all over the place. And I may not want the green all over the place. I may just want the green right on top of him. So what I can do is if I scoot this down to here, and then I alt-click between these, what that does is it limits these changes just to wherever this is. Okay? So remember back from like your intro to Photoshop class, that's a layer mask, and now we have a clipping mask. So this is clipped by this layer. Wherever this layer is, that's where that one's going to show up. Okay? So there's that on top of that. Take the opacity down some, maybe a little bit too bright. I could also go into the mask here and just using my paintbrush and painting black, I could hide some of these areas. If I don't like it on the shoes, I could just paint it off of the shoes. Maybe I don't like it right here. Maybe I just want it to be on that side. And if I have a stylus, obviously this becomes a little bit easier. There we go. So now it's more on this side than it is on the other side. Then I'm going to go and grab an image. And just like before, we don't want to just grab any images. We want to grab images that are licensed for reuse. So if I go to my search tools, I say label for reuse with modification. I obviously have to find something pretty big, like this is a pretty big image. That's kind of neat there, I'll take that one. Okay, so these are all licensed for reuse. So if I copy this, I go here and I paste it. Nope, it wants me to, oh, it's still downloading. There we go. Let's try that copy again. Nope. Save picture as. Typically you put it in your folder. I'm just going to save it to the desktop for now. So I'm dropping this on the bottom. I can rescale it. There we go. Adjust that a little bit. I could also grab these and push these over some. And realistically, I could pretty much drop him anywhere I want. Alright, so that looks pretty neat. Okay, and then that green that I have here kind of matches the green that will be coming through the trees there. And then the dark area wouldn't have it because it's kind of in the dark area. And if I needed to, I can go through and go down here. Go with the darker color. I'm just kind of like smacking on a lot of darkness here, and then I can take that opacity down. So I'm kind of darkening the area where maybe his shadow would be. Okay, so I'm again kind of customizing what that end image is looking like. I'm not just leaving it as is. And then what I can do, I didn't use the depth here. That's for other stuff. I didn't use the floor. I did use the mask and the SSS. So I'm going to take all the stuff that I'm seeing, and I'm just going to Control A and copy it, or sorry, Control Shift copy it. And then I'm going to paste it. And when I paste it, this gives me a flattened out version of that image. And that way I can go to my filters, I can go to my blur gallery, and on my iris blur, pull this over here, shrink this down. I'm able to add a little bit of fake depth of field to the character. And I can use the Alt key to kind of pull this off. Okay, so I'm holding Alt and just dragging this, and this is where the depth of field is going to start. So basically he's going to be in focus, and that's gradually going to drop off the focus around it. There we go. So now if we turn on this other stuff here, that stuff, we can see the before and after. So let me just scoot him over here. So you can see how that depth of field just adds a nice little touch to it at the end, just to kind of help soften it. And then I can add a vignette to this too, so I'll go to a new layer. I'll go with a big brush. Oops. And I'm just kind of like hitting these other areas here. Something like that. And then I just have to change this to a multiply. And what that does is it darkens those black areas. Anything that was black in that original color becomes really dark. Anything that was white isn't affected. And then I can play with the opacity just to kind of help hone it into where I want that to be. And if I need to, I can still go back with my brushes and paint black where I want it dark, or white where I want it light. Okay, so there's lots of different ways we can kind of play with this to get the desired look to this end image. close those? I did. Window. No, I didn't. There's there. Okay. So then I would just take this image. I would save it. Sarcona character. Okay, and I'm saving it as a PSD. That way, when you turn it into me, I can see all the stuff you've done to it outside of just the original image you got out of that software. Now, here's an example image of one that I did. So there's another one. So I gave him a name. I added this background, changed the colors here, and if I open up my PSD for it. You can see something very similar to what you just saw. So here's layers and layer masks, and I adjusted the exposure on it. Okay, you can see he has a bit of a shadow right here at the bottom. Right, if I zoom in on it, you can see there's a bit of a shadow there coming from the other side. Okay, but this one's just a flat image as opposed to having a background image in there too. That's another way you can kind of present how you want this to turn out. Okay, so that's going to be the process. Once you have it modeled and modeled, and then you texture it, now you can go through and render it. Other things you can play with under the lights, you can play with these lights here. So you can move the lights around. You could add new lights to your scene. Come on. There you go. So there's this light, there's that light, and they each have their own intensity, so I could play with them and then adjust them and then tweak them and do whatever. Like Jesse was saying, having a turntable. So under the movie, there's a turntable. So if you go to turntable here, it records a turntable. And I believe what it's doing now, because I haven't done this in a year, is that it's just going to go through and render each frame. Okay? And as it renders each frame, it's saving this stuff out somewhere. I'm trying to remember where it saves it to. I think it's my folder. B drive. So it might save it here, or I'll have to look up and see where it's saving it to. Okay? But that's another thing, and this will give you like a 360 of your character. Now, just a tip on when you do a character and you do a 360 turntable thing, the back sides are pretty boring, right? So kind of speed up the back sides, or just show the front. Just show it from like the left side to the right side kind of thing. That's typically all you need for that. Come on. Because if you look here, stuck in a turntable. There we go. That side's not really interesting to look at, but the front is where all the detail is. So having it spin from one side to the other would definitely be advantageous to us. I wonder if it's because I stretched my window out too far like this. Nope. I don't know. I probably got to reboot ZBrush. Okay. So that's how you're going to be doing that guy. Your guy. Okay. Now, if you don't get to that stage, however far you get, just turn that in. So if you get to the ZBrush part and you have your character model, you don't get to texture, you don't get to render, turn that guy in. Okay. If you get a texture but you don't get it rendered out, still turn that guy in. Whatever you have, turn it in. Okay. Any questions on the ZBrush stuff? Okay. No, I'm saving this, but I'll just save it anyway. All right.